Good afternoon, Moadim Lesimcha, and welcome to IBA News this Tuesday, the 18th of October and second day of Sukkot. I'm Elon Aslan-Levy, joining you live from Jerusalem. The UNESCO Executive Board today formally adopted the draft resolution passed last week that fails to acknowledge the Judeo-Christian connection to the Temple Mount. This despite a request for a recast vote by Mexico after announcing its intentions to change its previous position and abstain on the resolution instead of voting in favour. This comes after Mexico fired its ambassador to UNESCO, who is Jewish, for protesting against the original vote in favour. In its U-turn, Mexico also protested the UN body's referral to the holy sites in Jerusalem by their Arabic names only. Today, it sufficed with issuing a statement to the committee protesting its offensive and biased position against the Jewish people. Brazil, which also voted in favour last week, backed the Mexican statement. The change in Mexico's position also comes after strong protests by that country's Jewish community. The resolution submitted by the Palestinian Authority condemns Israel on a variety of issues, denying Jewish and Christian ties to Jerusalem by treating the Temple Mount as an exclusively Muslim site. In response to UNESCO's decision, Education Minister Naftali Bennett ordered the Israeli National Commission for UNESCO to suspend all professional activities with the UN body, and today said that suspension would remain in place until it reverses its decision. Meanwhile, security for UNESCO chief Irina Bokova has been heightened after she received death threats for criticizing last week's resolution, when she said, "Nowhere more than in Jerusalem do Jewish, Christian and Muslim heritage and traditions share space." Deputy Foreign Minister Tzipi Hotovely has instructed the Foreign Ministry to suspend ties with the Minerva Center for Human Rights at Jerusalem's Hebrew University, owing to its cooperation with what she called anti-Israel organizations. She also requested that the center remove the Foreign Ministry from its list of supporters on the website. Hotovely specifically named left-wing NGOs B'Tselem, Gisha, the Public Committee Against Torture, Bimkom, Emek Shaveh, and the Center for the Defense of the Individual as these organizations with a record of ignoring the human rights of Jews. Hotovely accused the Minerva Center of advancing a political agenda with radical organizations under the guise of academia, and insisted the ministry will not collaborate with organizations that, according to her, slander Israel from every possible platform. The Hebrew University rejected the claims, describing the Minerva Center as an academic body that enjoys an international reputation that works within the framework of the Hebrew University to advance the study of human rights. 2 Israeli motorists were lightly injured after stones were thrown at their vehicle near Atur in East Jerusalem this afternoon. Stones were also thrown at a person near the Old City's Lions Gate, injuring him lightly. Last night, a bus driver was lightly injured after stones were thrown at his bus near Husan in Gush Etzion, smashing the windscreen. The bus driver continued on his route, heading for the bus terminal in Beitar Illit, where he was treated for his injuries and taken to Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in the capital. Also last night, fire bombs were thrown at an intersection near the settlement of Ofra in the Binyamin district. No injuries were reported, but one of the fire bombs caused a brush fire, which was quickly extinguished. In Iraq, government forces are pressing ahead with the next stage of their operation to retake the northern city of Mosul from Islamic State. The offensive began yesterday, and initial reports said they were progressing more quickly than expected into the outskirts of the city of over 1 million residents. ISIS has threatened to turn the assault into a bloodbath for the attacking forces, and reports say its suicide bombers are being deployed. Iraq's Kurdish forces, meanwhile, have announced that they are pausing in their advance on Mosul after capturing a number of villages and allowing the more heavily armed government troops to advance. Al Jazeera reports that hundreds of residents started fleeing towards Syria as the offensive began. Many of the Sunni residents fear that Shia militias and troops will take out revenge on them. The Iraqi and Kurdish forces will likely retake Mosul, but this won't destroy the Islamic State. This according to Seth Fransman, an editor and analyst for the Jerusalem Post, who was recently with the Kurdish forces near Mosul. He spoke with Ari O'Sullivan.
This operation is taking place now after about 2 years of waiting to reconquer the last ISIS stronghold in northern Iraq. Mosul is a huge city. It used to be home, I think, to 2.5 million people, Iraq's second largest city. After ISIS took it over, a lot of those people became refugees, especially the minority communities that were persecuted, like Christians and Yazidis. So ISIS, really, Mosul is really the capital of ISIS in Iraq, and this is the last major, massive operation that will retake the city and will expel ISIS from Iraq, and then basically, as you know, ISIS will just be in Syria, in Raqqa.
Is it going to be a bloodbath?
ISIS has said, this will be some huge, massive slaughterhouse, and you'll all be welcome to your deaths. And, as we've seen in other ISIS operations, ISIS laces areas with burning oil wells, and they have IEDs everywhere. When I was there, we went down in tunnels that ISIS had built, and we saw like a lot of the improvised explosive device TNT infrastructure that they have. But the fact is, ISIS has been severely degraded. They don't have a lot of fighters left. So they may have all sorts of like little bombs and all sorts of things, the kind of things Israel has encountered with Hamas or Hezbollah. But the question is whether or not the civilian population in Mosul will be used as like human shields, and whether large numbers of those people will be killed. But I think when we see what the Iraqi army did in Fallujah and Ramadi, large sections of those cities were destroyed, but tens of thousands of people didn't die. Most of the people actually are able to escape. So I tend to not think there will be a huge bloodbath. There may be a lot of epic destruction to property and things like that.
Well, describe for me, please, what's in it for the Kurds? What's their motivation?
The Kurds, they bore the brunt of this ISIS attack in August 2014. They've lost thousands of people. And look, the Kurds have an interest in Mosul because there are Kurds that used to live in Mosul. And it's always been kind of on the border between what the Kurdish region and obviously the Arab region. And as you probably recall, during Saddam Hussein's time, Mosul and those areas were heavily Arabized by Saddam sending in Arabs and collectivizing all the other little villages around it of minority communities. Some of these minority communities, like they speak Kurdish, like some of the Kakai or Yazidis. So I think the Kurds would like to have influence over Mosul. And I think we have to understand that in 2004 and 2008, during the American occupation, Mosul was a center of jihadist extremist activity. So the Kurds, every time there's extremism in Mosul, all of that weight falls on Kurdistan. Kurds get killed in suicide bombings, Kurds get murdered, Kurds get assassinated. So the Kurds want Mosul to be a peaceful city, not a city that's a kind of endless cyclical threat.
What's the motivation behind this operation? Is it to defeat ISIS or is it to make Iraq whole again?
Well, I think from the Iraqi central government's perspective, yes, it's to make Iraq whole again. Mosul's a part of Iraq. You can't just have a city that's alienated from you like in Israel or America. You wouldn't say, well, we'll just allow Houston, Texas to sort of be its own thing. So, of course, you have to take back that area and put your boots on the ground. The motivation is then the question is, okay, so what do they want next? They want to defeat ISIS. Obviously, from the perspective of the government, ISIS, beheaded 1,000 cadets, mostly Shia, in Camp Speicher in 2014. Like, these are serious war crimes, and ISIS has to pay for them. So there's a desire for revenge. I think from the Kurdish perspective, it's less clear what the defeat of ISIS necessarily gets them, because they don't want to sacrifice lives for Mosul. And then they're like, okay, but then what happens next? So there's some uncertainty, I think, from their perspective is, okay, what does that mean now that Mosul's back in the central government's hands?
Is this operation going to defeat ISIS?
No, Mosul won't destroy ISIS. ISIS will exist in Syria. And then when ISIS is defeated, there will be ISIS cells all over the world, just like there used to be Al-Qaeda cells. And ISIS will become some new, just like Al-Qaeda became something new like ISIS, these jihadists will find some new imprimatur, and we're going to live with groups like ISIS for the rest of our lives.
Closer to home, Route 10, which runs along the Egypt-Israel border, will be open to civilian traffic over the Sukkot holiday between Pitchat Nitzana and Mount Karkum. The road will remain open until after Simchat Torah. The highway has been closed intermittently to civilian traffic since 2011, following a terror attack in which 8 Israelis were killed. Survivors of that attack questioned the decision to reopen the road over the Sukkot holiday, saying they have yet to receive answers from the authorities why the road was open to civilian traffic 5 years ago, despite warnings of terror attacks. A new monument to the victims of the Altalena, in which 16 members of the Irgun or Etzel were killed by the Israel Defense Forces in 1948, is set to be unveiled next week at the Nachalat Yitzhak Cemetery in Tel Aviv. The new memorial is a concrete metal-coated model of the boat that appears to be sinking. One side of the ship bears a quote from the late Menachem Begin, urging his men not to fire back as they came under attack by the IDF, saying, "We can never have a civil war." The National Heritage Sites, headed by the Prime Minister, and the Tel Aviv Burial Society were involved in the joint project. The Interior Ministry in Austria has announced plans to tear down the house where Adolf Hitler was born to prevent it from becoming a pilgrimage site for neo-Nazi groups. The government has already ordered the purchase of the house in Braunau am Inn, a town near the border with Germany. A committee of experts has recommended that the building undergo a thorough overhaul or architectural rearrangement, meaning it would be torn down to the foundations and a new government office or community centre built atop it. Still in Europe, Marine Le Pen, the leader of the French far-right National Front Party and a candidate for president in next year's elections, has said, if elected, she would ban all conspicuous religious symbols in public, including not just the burqa, but the kippah too. In a recent radio interview, Le Pen said she intends to expand the scope of the 2004 law banning conspicuous religious symbols in public schools and aimed at preventing Muslim women from wearing the religious head covering or hijab. She explained she expects Jews to understand the sacrifice expected of them in the battle against Islamic extremism and said the ban would be enforced by the police. Will Bob Dylan turn up to collect his Nobel Prize for Literature? The answer, it seems, is blowing in the wind. The Swedish Academy says it has given up trying to contact the singer-songwriter. The Academy's permanent secretary said she had called and sent emails to close collaborators of Dylan, but has not yet heard from him. 75-year-old Dylan has yet to respond to the accolade announced Thursday, and at recent concerts failed to acknowledge the award. On Friday, he performed along with the Rolling Stones, who commended him on the nomination. The Academy added it thinks Dylan will show up to the ceremony on the 10th of December, but for now, it's given up knocking on his door. With Sukkot upon us, Jews around the world are camping out in their gardens and praying for rain. I went to the Kotel earlier to investigate one of this holiday's stranger customs. There are few Jewish rituals quite as odd as shaking a citron, palm frond and willow and myrtle branches all around. Unsurprisingly, everyone has a different interpretation of what it all means.
Each one represents some other part of Yiddishkeit, Judaism. We have Hadassah, which is for the person who's sweet and doing a lot of good deeds, and that's what we want to do. And the Lulav is that we have to stand upright, and we have to be proud of who we are and what we do.
The story starts in Leviticus, where God commands, "And ye shall take you on the first day the boughs of goodly trees, branches of palm trees, and the boughs of thick trees, and willows of the brook, and ye shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days." Somewhere along the line, that changed to the 4 species we're familiar with today.
We do it in praise of God and for the purpose of showing our devotion to our heritage and in praise of what grows in the land of Israel.
We hold them all together for the unity of all Israel. Also, Sukkot is a chag for unity with all the other people in the whole world, not only Jewish.
According to the book of Nehemiah, the scribe Ezra understood this verse to mean the Jews should actually build their Sukkot out of the branches, as the Samaritans still do today. So why do we shake them instead?
Because God is in every direction, so we want to shake it right, left, up, down, behind, all around, because God is everywhere.
But according to Elon Gilad, Haaretz's go-to investigator on the origins of Jewish practices, if shaking the 4 species seems oddly pagan, well, that's because it originally was. He says Ezra's interpretation suggests the branches weren't shaken at all in First Temple times.
Obviously, we're looking for a time in Jewish history where there's a break in tradition, that the tradition can change so radically. And it seems that this happened at the time of the Maccabee revolt, because there's a break of leadership, there's a change in the religious authorities, there's a time when people are not celebrating Sukkot because of the persecution of the Greeks.
So what caused this break in tradition? Gilad speculates it has its roots in Hellenistic culture.
Because we know that in the ancient world, in the Hellenistic world, you would shake boughs of trees, and especially fronds of date fronds. So it apparently came from the Greeks. They read the Maccabees, which were already, they were fighting the Greeks, but they were already living in Hellenistic world. So they knew of that tradition of shaking boughs of trees and date fronds in a victory procession. And since they already knew about that tradition, when they read the verse in Leviticus, they could already assume that it's referring to the same tradition.
Whatever its origins, this custom will remain an eternal mystery. Not that that's ever ruined an ancient tradition. The legendary Harlem Globetrotters basketball team have arrived in Israel as part of their 2016 World Tour. They will play against local teams starting this evening at the Menorah Mivtachim Arena in Tel Aviv. More here from Ari O'Sullivan.
The Harlem Globetrotters are 9 years old, and that's a good excuse to set out on a world tour.
It feels good to be a part of something so legendary. We're a very positive team, and we like to bring smiles to faces. So, we do a lot of stuff on the court as well as off the court. We go to school, we visit schools, children's hospitals, community centers.
They're going to hold 7 games, or performances if you will, in Israel.
Yes, this is actually my first time as well, and we just coming out here to have a good time, show the people of Tel Aviv a great time. We've been learning a little Hebrew, so we're going to come out here. We're going to... Shalom. Oh.
The Harlem Globetrotters were born in Chicago in 1926 as a regular team, but they had, even then, something special.
Oh, yeah.
We have a special show for Israel, so you'll see high-flying slam dunks, great ball handling, great comedy, but most importantly, memories that'll last forever.
They started doing antics, and the crowd loved it.
We are innovators of the game, and we like to always interact with our fans, So 1 minute you might see me going up for a 360 dunk, next second I might be sitting next to your kid, eating his popcorn, giving him a high five.
They're going to be bringing to the arena their goofy antics and electric ball playing and lots of smiles, and get the crowd rocking. So that saying, it's not how you play the game, it's whether you win or lose, well, that doesn't really fit in for the Harlem Globetrotters.
In finance, the shekel is down and the stock market is starting Chol HaMoed on the rise. And in weather, tomorrow will be partly cloudy with an additional slight drop in temperatures and a chance of very light rain in the north and along the coast in the morning. That's all for today. Wishing you Moadim L'Simcha. We leave you with footage of thousands of Agur cranes that landed in the Chula Valley in northern Israel yesterday. The site, considered the second largest bird migration corridor in the world, is used by more than 1 billion birds annually, recuperating in the Holy Land on their travels between Africa and Europe.